You know how a restaurant can look incredible on Instagram, and then you go there, and in real life it's loud, cramped, and kind of disappointing? Well, that's what a lot of interior design advice is doing to people's homes, because the advice is optimized for photos, not for living. So today, I'm breaking down the design advice that sounds great online, but quietly ruins real homes. And if you stay until the end, I'll give you actionable steps you can take to avoid these traps so your home always looks and feels its best. So using open shelving as your primary kitchen storage is usually something someone does when they want their kitchen to feel lighter, more charming, or more homey. And open shelves definitely look great in photos, and people will tell you that they make your kitchen feel bigger and more personal. The problem is, they're much more functional in those photographs than they are as a real storage system. So in setups like this, everything looks beautiful because the shelves are curated. You've got matching dishes, spaced out pieces, and nothing too tall or awkward. But that only works if you're willing to treat your everyday kitchen items like display objects. The second you add mismatched bowls, bulkier cookware, or anything that you don't want to look at all day, the shelves stop feeling charming and just start feeling exposed. Now, this kitchen is a little closer to how most people actually live because the shelves are packed tighter, the items are stacked out of necessity, and now the kitchen is starting to feel a bit visually busy, even when it's clean. But let's be honest, this kitchen still looks pretty good because we're only part of the way there so far. Now, this kitchen is a little closer to what would be reality for most of us, where things are getting pretty tight. And especially in a kitchen with lower ceilings like this one, the room does start to feel cramped pretty quickly, even though they have nice finishes in here. But now this is what most of our kitchens would look like if we only had open shelving. Glasses, pantry items, snacks, small appliances, everything is out in the open. And this means that dust builds up, grease settles on surfaces near the stove, and you're constantly reorganizing just to keep things from looking chaotic. So it is functional, but it's also high maintenance in a way that people rarely anticipate. And if you've got a lot of dishware and cookware, your kitchen is going to look more like this one, if not worse. So it's not the best look if you want a calm, collected kitchen where you can tuck the disorganized stuff away and just have a clean looking place that doesn't stress you out. And that's why open shelving works best when it's used selectively, not as your main storage. So keep shelves for things you actually reach for every day. So the spices, oils, salt, pepper, maybe a few everyday bowls. So that way things are functional, not performative. And then let the closed cabinets do the heavy lifting for the rest. You can also dedicate just one small shelf as a display instead of turning your entire kitchen into a showroom that you have to maintain daily. That way you still get the openness without signing up for constant visual stress. Now, this is one of those pieces of advice that sounds smart, safe, and responsible, because people will tell you neutrals are timeless, easier to live with, and better long term, especially if you're worried about resale value. And neutrals can definitely work, but when they become your entire plan, that's when your space starts to feel flat. So in rooms like this, everything sits in the same quiet beige family. The sofa, the rug, the walls, even the art. Nothing is technically wrong, but nothing is pulling your eye either, so the space ends up feeling soft in a way that's almost sleepy. It looks calm, but it also feels unfinished, like the room is waiting for something that never shows up. And again here, the palette of the entire room is totally neutral. The sofa, the chair, the rug, and the table all live in that same tonal range, so there's no visual hierarchy at all. And when everything is neutral and similar in scale, the room loses all sense of contrast, and that's when it starts to feel more like a showroom than a place where someone actually lives. And in this bedroom, the all-neutral palette is draining the personality out of the space. Yes, the palette is clean and soothing, but without any variation in tone or material, the room just feels like a boring hotel rather than someone's actual bedroom. So yes, it's calm, but it doesn't say anything about the person sleeping there, and you're going to get bored of this in a matter of weeks. So neutrals work best when they're the backdrop of the room, not the main event, because they do create that calm feeling, but only when they're supporting something else. But when everything is neutral, nothing has a reason to stand out, and the room just ends up feeling flat. So a good approach is to keep neutrals on the elements that are hardest to change, so those being the walls and the floor. and then introduce contrast through layers that sit on top of that base. But to be clear, that contrast doesn't need to be loud color. It can come from deeper tones, darker woods, black or aged metals, or other sorts of richer materials that give the eye somewhere to land. Now, this is one of the most common pieces of advice people hear when they're trying to make a room feel more spacious. And the logic sounds reasonable. Clear the center, push everything out, and suddenly you'll have more floor space. But in reality, this usually does the opposite. In rooms like this, pushing everything to the perimeter creates a big empty hole in the middle that doesn't actually serve any purpose. The seating feels disconnected, like it's lining the walls instead of forming a conversation area, and the room just starts to feel awkward. You technically have more open floor space, but it doesn't feel inviting or even usable at all. Then in this layout, all the furniture hugs the walls, while the rug and coffee table float in the center with no real relationship to the seating. And that distance makes the room feel larger in measurements, but emotionally colder and less comfortable. Instead of pulling you in, the setup just pushes everyone apart, which is why it ends up feeling more like a waiting room than a living room. And in more lived-in homes like this, pushing furniture back is often a reaction to not having certainty about your layout. The sofa, chairs, and tables just feel scattered, and the room lacks a clear center of gravity. Even though nothing is technically wrong, the space feels unfinished, as if the furniture is avoiding each other instead of working together. And in setups like this, pushing everything against the walls often leads to overcorrecting in the worst way. The seating gets stretched along the perimeter, the center becomes this oversized no man's land, and suddenly the room ends up feeling like the kind of place where 8 college bros would sit on the couch and watch the game. And if you're a college bro watching this, more power to you. I was there once as well, but for most people, that's not the vibe they're looking for in their living room. So instead of treating the walls as the default parking spot for your furniture, pull your main pieces slightly inward to create a defined seating zone. Most living rooms want a clear seating zone where people can talk, relax, and just face each other without shouting across empty space. So pull the sofa and chairs inward just enough that they feel connected. And then use a rug to define that zone, and use the breathing room around your furniture for lighting, side tables, and circulation without everything feeling jammed. And if your room is large or awkwardly shaped, think in zones instead of one giant layout. By having a seating area, a reading corner, and a small workspace, you make the room feel useful instead of empty. Because open floor space only feels good when it has a specific job to do. Now, if you're furnishing a home for the first time, matching feels safe. Same sofa set, same color, same vibe, and everything feels put together. The problem is, once everything matches, nothing actually stands out anymore. In rooms like this, where the sofa, love seat, chair, and even the rug all feel like they came from the same set, the space starts to feel flat. There's no tension, no contrast, and no moment that pulls your eye in. And it just ends up feeling more like a furniture showroom than a real home, which is why it's so forgettable. And you see the same thing happen in bedrooms when everything is perfectly coordinated. The bed, bench, nightstands, lamps, and art all live in the same color family with the same finish and same mood. So I guess it looks calm, but it's also way too controlled. And there's nothing personal breaking up all that sameness, so the room just feels staged. So instead of matching everything, start by choosing 1 or 2 anchoring pieces, something like the sofa or the bed, and keep those calm and simple. These pieces give the room stability, but they shouldn't be doing all the talking. Then once that base is set, the rest of the room can add some interest. And one good way to think about this is to think in terms of relationships, not sets. Because your pieces don't need to match exactly in order to work together. They just need something in common, like a similar tone, material, or visual weight. A coffee table and side table can still feel cohesive without being identical, and it's actually that subtle variation that keeps your space from feeling flat. And by the way, don't be afraid to let your rooms come together over time, because buying everything in one go almost always leads to that fake showroom kind of look. But spaces that evolve naturally over time feel a lot more personal because they reflect deliberate choices, not pre-made packages. Because remember, the goal isn't for your home to be perfectly coordinated, it's for it to feel balanced, layered, and lived in. Now, going bigger feels like a shortcut to making a room feel more impressive, but scale only works when the room can actually support it. For example, oversized sectionals like this one often swallow the room instead of elevating it, because when one piece takes up most of the floor area, circulation disappears and the layout becomes locked into a single heavy setup. So a better move is breaking seating into 2 or 3 pieces, so a properly sized sofa with a chair or ottoman, so the room stays flexible and visually lighter. Because large furniture placed wall to wall generally makes your room feel tighter, not bigger. And even when everything technically fits, which we can't say about this room here, the lack of breathing room around those pieces compresses the space and just flattens your layout. But leaving visible gaps, especially at the sides and corners, does a lot more for perceived size than adding extra inches to the furniture itself. So if you really want lots of seating, mix in different types instead of relying on a single massive piece. You get multiple seats through a combination of sofas, accent chairs, and lighter pieces that visually break things up. And it feels social and flexible, but not overwhelming, because your space still has breathing room. And if lounging is your priority, then an L-shaped sofa is usually the smarter move for a smaller space. You still get that stretch out comfort, but the footprint is a little more controlled. And in dining areas, bigger can work, but only when everything else steps back. So here, the table is clearly oversized, but the surrounding furniture is minimal and there's nothing competing for your attention. And so here, the table becomes the anchor, but it's not a problem because the rest of the room knows to stay quiet. Now, here's the thing most people don't realize about bad design advice. It's rarely wrong in isolation. It's wrong because it's incomplete. It's advice that's been pulled out of context, flattened into a soundbite, and handed to people as a rule they're supposed to follow blindly. And that's the common thread behind everything I've talked about today. Open shelving isn't evil. Neutrals aren't boring. Furniture doesn't need to float in the middle of the room. Matching pieces aren't a crime, and bigger furniture isn't automatically a mistake. The problem is when any of those ideas becomes your entire strategy. Because the truth is, most design advice fails because it treats your home like a checklist instead of a system. It tells you what to do without ever explaining why it works or when it stops working. And once you remove the why, people start applying the same rules to every room, every layout, and every lifestyle, and then they wonder why their home feels off no matter how much money they spend. But good design doesn't come from following rules. It comes from understanding trade-offs. Open shelving trades maintenance for visual openness, and matching furniture trades character for cohesion. Neither of those trades are inherently bad, as long as you know you're making them. And this is the shift most people never make. They don't design their homes, they react to advice, trends, and Pinterest images without ever stopping to ask what their room actually needs. So they keep layering fixes on top of fixes, hoping the next purchase will finally make things click. But design doesn't click when you add more. It clicks when you see more clearly. And once you understand how space, contrast, and hierarchy actually work, you stop chasing aesthetics and start diagnosing problems. You can look at a room and say, this feels stressful because there's too much visual noise. Or, this feels stiff because everything is trying to match instead of relate. And that awareness is kind of everything. Because from that point on, you're not decorating, you're making decisions. You know what to keep quiet, what to emphasize, and what to leave alone. You stop wasting money on fixes that don't address the real issue, and your home starts to feel calmer and more personal. Not because it follows rules, but because it finally makes sense. So if there's one takeaway from this video, it's this. Homes don't fail because people don't care. They fail because people are never taught how to think about space in the first place. But once you learn that way of thinking, you don't just improve your home, you stop second-guessing every decision you make. So now that you can see why these common rules don't work the way people claim, The next step is learning what does work when you zoom out and design your home as a system. So watch this video next where I'll walk you through one of the most important decisions you'll make when shaping your space and how to get it right the first time.